I never imagined that buying my dream home would turn into a neighborhood nightmare. But that's exactly what happened the day I crossed paths with Deborah Wilson. Although around here, everyone quietly refers to her as Karen. As the president of our HOA in Oakage Estates, Deborah took her role seriously. Far too seriously. She strutted through the neighborhood like a self-appointed sheriff, clipboard always in hand, ready to hand out violation notices. Her silver streak bob would practically bounce with excitement every time she caught a trash bin left out after 8 a.m., or spotted a row blade of grass slightly taller than the allowed 3 inches. For the first 6 months, I managed to stay under her radar. I kept my lawn trimmed, my paint colors within the approved palette, and my holiday decorations minimal and HOA compliant. Life was quiet, peaceful, until the day I decided to plant a small vegetable garden in my backyard. It was a sunny Saturday morning. I was out back, tilling the soil and picturing fresh tomatoes and herbs, when I heard a familiar high-pitched voice call out from over the fence. "Excuse me, what exactly do you think you're doing?" I turned around, wiping sweat from my brow. Deborah stood on the other side of the fence, designer sunglasses pushed up on her head, phone in hand, probably already recording. "Good morning, Deborah," I said, forcing a polite smile. "Just putting in a small vegetable garden." "Did you submit a landscape modification form?" she asked flatly, like she already knew the answer. I blinked. I didn't realize I needed one for something in my own backyard. Her lips thinned. Every exterior modification requires HOA approval. It's in the covenant you signed at closing. She gave me a tight smile, one that didn't come close to reaching her eyes. "You'll need to stop work immediately and submit the proper paperwork. The board will review your request." Reluctantly, I agreed. I filled out the form, paid the $50 fee, and waited 3 long weeks, only to have a request denied. The reason? Vegetable gardens attract pests and create unsightly views. I was annoyed, but figured it wasn't worth the fight. I had no idea that this was just the beginning. The real battle began when I decided to install solar panels. This time, I did everything by the book. I checked state laws, which clearly protected my right to install solar panels, regardless of HOA guidelines, and I still submitted the paperwork out of courtesy. I hired a reputable company to do the work. But the morning they showed up to install the system, so did Deborah. She marched up my driveway like a general heading into combat. "Stop this immediately," she snapped. Her face was red, eyes locked on the installers. "The board hasn't approved this modification." I stayed calm, handing her a printed copy of the state law. "Actually, Deborah, solar installations are protected. The HOA can't block them." She glanced at the paper, barely reading it before crumpling it in her hand. "We'll see about that," she muttered with a smirk, turning on her heel. The next day, I got a letter, 3 separate HOA violations. Not one had anything to do with solar panels. Apparently, my mailbox was a wrong shade of black. My garbage bins were visible from the street, they weren't, and my front door wreath was excessively large. It was clear retaliation. But instead of arguing, I hired a professional photographer to document every inch of my property. I gathered all the evidence, clear, timestamp photos, and sent them to the board. And that was just the beginning. I sent my documentation, including the photos and a professionally written letter, to the entire HOA board. I even referenced the state laws against selective enforcement and retaliation. The result? The fines were quietly dropped without a word of apology. But from that moment on, it was clear I had made an enemy for life. Karen's vendetta against me only escalated. She began holding HOA meetings without notifying me. My guests would get parking violation slips on their windshields within minutes of arriving. I'd host a quiet family dinner, and suddenly the police would show up in response to anonymous noise complaints. I stayed calm. I documented everything. I kept my tone civil in every interaction, but instead of easing up, it only seemed to make her more determined. The breaking point came after I returned from a week-long business trip. I pulled into my driveway, only to see a crew of workers installing a tall white vinyl fence, stretching directly through what I knew was my property. The fence cut in by nearly 6 feet, swallowing up the apple tree I'd been tending since I moved in. I walked over to one of the workers. He looked uncomfortable as I approached. "What's going on here?" I asked. "HOA president ordered the fence," he said with a shrug. "Said it was approved by the board." I immediately called Karen. She answered cheerfully. "Yes, we determined that the property line needed to be clearly marked. The survey was quite clear." "What survey?" I snapped, my patience finally wearing thin. I was never notified about a survey or fence. "It was in the minutes of last month's meeting," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Oh, that's right, you weren't there. Well, too bad. The fence stays." "I want to see this survey," I said flatly. "You can submit a written request to the board," she replied. "We'll review it at next quarter's meeting." Then she hung up. That was it. No more playing nice. I hired a licensed surveyor that same day. By the next morning, I had the proof in hand. The new fence definitely encroached on my property. Armed with official documentation, I contacted a real estate attorney who specialized in property disputes. "This is textbook encroachment," he said after reviewing everything. "Installing a permanent structure on someone else's land without permission? That's not just an HOA issue. It could qualify as criminal trespassing and property damage." We immediately sent a cease and desist letter to both Karen personally and to the HOA board, demanding that the fence be removed at their expense. Turns out, the other board members had no idea what she'd done. They called an emergency meeting, and this time, I was actually invited. At the meeting, Karen's usually polished exterior began to crack. "He doesn't even maintain that side of his yard," she shouted, her face flushed with frustration. "That apple tree drops fruit on my patio. It's a nuisance." He refused to do anything about it. Tom Davidson, the board treasurer, spoke up, his tone quiet but firm. "Did you actually have a survey done, Deborah?" Karen hesitated. "Well, not officially, but it's obvious where the line is," she insisted. "And as HOA president, I have executive authority to make decisions for the good of the community." Tom looked embarrassed. "That's not how this works. At all. We could be facing serious legal liability." The board took an immediate vote and agreed to have the fence removed at the HOA's expense. But for me, that wasn't enough. Karen had literally crossed the line. The next morning, I filed a police report for criminal trespassing and property damage. I handed over my survey and every piece of documentation I gathered. I wasn't going to let her get away with it. I submitted everything. My survey results, photographs, and written statements from the fence installers, all confirming that Karen had personally directed them where to place the fence. To my surprise, the police didn't just file the report. They took it very seriously. Apparently, I wasn't the first. Karen had pulled similar stunts with other neighbors, most of whom had just backed down to avoid conflict. But this time, the district attorney decided enough was enough. They wanted to make an example of her. 2 days later, I was outside watering my front lawn when a police cruiser pulled up in front of Karen's house. I tried not to stare, but that was impossible. 2 officers walked up to her front door. Moments later, I heard the knock, followed by a firm voice. "Deborah Wilson, we have a warrant for your arrest on charges of criminal trespassing, destruction of property, and filing false documents." Her voice shrieked loud enough for the whole neighborhood to hear. "This is ridiculous. Do you know who I am? I'm the president of this homeowners association." "Ma'am, please put your hands behind your back," the officer said calmly. What followed felt like something out of a courtroom drama. Karen, still insisting she was innocent and outraged, was handcuffed on her front porch. Neighbors peeked through blinds and came out onto their lawns, drawn by the spectacle. Her carefully styled hair was in disarray, and mascara ran down her cheeks as she sobbed about how I was ruining her life. She was released on bail that evening, but her troubles were only just beginning. The HOA board called an emergency meeting and voted unanimously to remove her as president. Turns out, the fence company didn't want to be involved in legal drama either. They turned over documentation showing she had falsified HOA approval forms. It didn't stop there. Her employer, a well-known real estate agency, caught wind of the arrest and the local buzz. Not wanting to be associated with the negative publicity, they placed her on indefinite leave. At her arraignment the following week, her attorney advised her, take a plea deal. The charge of criminal trespassing would be reduced to a misdemeanor if she agreed to pay for all property damages, cover my legal fees, and complete 200 hours of community service. The judge specified it would take place in the public park she'd so often complained about during HOA meetings. She showed up to court wearing a subdued gray pantsuit, a far cry from her usual polished appearance. As she stood before the judge, the weight of her situation finally seemed to register. "How was I supposed to know a stupid survey would matter this much?" she asked quietly, her voice full of disbelief. The judge looked at her, unimpressed. "Mrs. Wilson," he said, adjusting his glasses, "property boundaries aren't suggestions. They are legal designations protected by state law. Your role as HOA president gave you the authority to enforce community rules, not to rewrite reality to suit your preferences." Then he delivered the verdict. $15,000 in damages, legal fees, and court costs. Karen's expression went blank. It was like her brain couldn't process what she'd just heard. As the bailiff led her out of the courtroom, she turned and gave me one last look, filled with resentment, bitterness, and maybe even regret. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost